Thomas Learning Academy. I'm a strong supporter, as all council members are, of this excellent effort to assist students who need extra attention to improve their academic standing. I think it's strange that this is funded through the HHS department. And I had some strong words in that regard, and I'll briefly restate that our enormously able director, Uma Alawalia, has a budget of, is it $270 million, and is responsible for children, youth, and families, special needs housing, public health, aging and disability services, and behavioral and mental health. That's a big, big job, and that's a big, big portfolio. And it seems to me that closing the achievement gap isn't in that portfolio. Now, there's no question, as we have embarked on in the Kennedy Cluster effort, that the economic circumstances of children from disadvantaged families relate to their ability to learn, and social capital and the wide range of things that contribute to academic achievement. And so I'm very supportive of the Kennedy Cluster concept. I think it's a nice idea to take the same interagency approach in the Watkins Mill Cluster. I've been telling constituents, because they're asking me about it and it's on my mind, that the achievement gap is topic A right now. And we will have the opportunity to speak with our school system in greater depth, but our superintendent is here now. I'm going to resist further incursions on the HHS department to pay for closing the achievement gap, where a program is specifically described as having its mission the closing of the achievement gap. I'm going to resist mission creep, having that within the HHS department. That's what I'm going to do. And I stated that I would hope that FY15 is the last year that we fund the George B. Thomas Learning Academy out of the HHS department. I don't fully understand why the contract monitors who work for that department would be best equipped to assess whether participants' academic standings have improved. I don't think that's what the contract monitors in Health and Human Services are best able to do. It's $900,000 now, nearly $1 million. We need better assessment, better data collection, and to its great credit, the George B. Thomas Learning Academy on its own assembled an academic assessment with a treatment group and a control group. It's very impressive. And the statistician who assembled it made contact with me after the meeting, because I asked who did this and what are the credentials of the person who did it, and she shared with me her credentials. And so that kind of assessment is very, very important. But it's no doubt in my mind that the mission of that effort is linked to MCPS, and that where we are bogged down in formality about what is funded within MCPS and what is funded outside of MCPS and what affects the maintenance of effort limit and what doesn't, we should get beyond that. We should group like things together. They teach you that in MCPS in kindergarten. And programs that are focused on closing the achievement gap ought not, in my judgment, if their primary focus is that, be funded in the HHS department. And so that speaks, so I've said what I've had to say about the George B. Thomas Learning Academy. I don't seek to disrupt that good effort. I support that good effort. But I don't think it ought to be funded out of the HHS department. And I feel the same way about the Children's Trust. And I'm speaking for myself, but the committee did not disagree with me. $100,000 recommended by the executive for administrative support, and I'm reading again on Circle 1 here, services to improve educational outcomes for children and families by addressing social determinants that impact the educational achievement gap. Now, I'm willing to consider that social determinants, there's some, like a Venn diagram, there's some overlap with the Health and Human Services portfolio. But to have the administrative support for that effort entirely funded out of the HHS budget, I asked what's the contribution from the school system, and I was told it's zero. And I had the opportunity for a one-on-one conversation with the superintendent who's here, and if he doesn't mind, I'd like to ask him if he would be willing, since he's here, to come on up. I asked him whether there would be administrative support coming from MCPS for this Children's Trust effort, and I'll give him the opportunity now. I'll give our distinguished superintendent the opportunity now to let us know whether there will be any administrative support or funding from MCPS for this effort to improve educational outcomes for children.
Well, thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to talk about something that is certainly near and dear to my heart, which is the extent to which we, as various parts of the Montgomery County public institutions, can accelerate the collaboration that we've found to be so beneficial, certainly in the time that I've been here, but I know it certainly predates me. The issue of whose responsibility is the achievement gap is one that certainly I take very seriously, and I very much appreciate the partnership that we have with Uma, with Gabe, Tom Mangers in the audience, and many others who also see it as their responsibility to provide our kids and our families with the supports they need to access all that is wonderful about Montgomery County. Where that sits in the budget is something that we are quite willing to talk about so that it makes sense for the entire county, because people don't think about the distinct lines between various accounts. They think about to what extent can public services help me and my family achieve a better life. So how we want to talk about going forward in the budget is something we're certainly very willing to do. The idea itself is one that we are deeply committed to, figuring out ways to deepen the institutional interagency collaboration between the various partners and finding a way to seed some new and innovative work that has not yet been done. We were not able to put any money into our budget this year to support the trust for a variety of reasons. And you know, what I appreciate is that this conversation's moving forward. I think we should come together over the summer or perhaps in the fall to talk about what would be the right way to do it that would satisfy everybody. Again, recognizing, and that's what I appreciate so much about my partners, recognizing that the same thing that our parents was. We're all in this together as the public servants of the county, and wherever the money sits is wherever the money sits, and we're happy to discuss that in ways that would enable us to achieve all of our shared interests, which is to have our folks access everything they need so they can achieve the dreams that they have for them and their families.
So it was the HHS committee's judgment, I guess we were meeting jointly with the Education Committee, that we would not approve funding this new proposal through the HHS department, and so the $100,000 proposed by the county executive for this purpose was not recommended by the joint committees, and that's the committee's recommendation. If any council member seeks to reopen that or reconsider that, now would be the time.
Councilmember Reamer.
Okay. Right now, if I understand it correctly, the county spends about $250 million a year outside of the MCPS budget on services that support the schools. That's a budget item that we've made note of in our county budget. $250 million, that's about the size of our police department. It's a very significant amount of funding. And it may be, well, I'm sure it is, scattered throughout various different departments. Perhaps we do need to rationalize how we present that set of services. And I can appreciate, the council member who doesn't want to see that have to get funded out of, one particular budget area. But to me, that's, then let's find a different budget area. A children's trust is a good idea. It's one I've heard some about. I am a little surprised that the school system didn't put it in its budget. It was my understanding that everybody was in agreement on this. So I want to talk about how to proceed. And I guess I want to ask the executive branch, given that the school system didn't allocate funding in this upcoming budget, what was your basis for for allocating that funding on the county side.
Could I just break in very quickly? The council president has let me know we're all handling a lot right now. And so the council president asked me to walk through these interdepartmental initiatives, which I thought could be disposed of relatively quickly. I now understand from my good friend, the council president, that our hardworking department heads in HHS, Recreation, and the police would like to share with the council the great progress that they've achieved in these interdisciplinary areas. So let's keep the conversation right now focused on this Children's Trust issue. And then once the council has exercised its will on the question of the Children's Trust, I will yield to our able department heads for a presentation from them on the work that they've been doing in these important interdisciplinary issue areas. So at this point, I'll ask Uma to address Councilmember Reamer's question, but you will get the chance after we're done with the Children's Trust.
I have a very preliminary question about this.
Well, could Uma respond to Councilmember Reamer's question, and then I'll call on Councilmember Florine?
Before Councilmember Reamer's question.
No, I don't think so. I'll call on you after Uma's
It is,
done.
what is the Children's Trust?
Okay, well, maybe Uma could address that as well.
Well, for the record, my name is Uma Alawali. I'm the director of the Department of Health and Human Services.
Well, there it is.
So
So
let me.
I want to just circle 5 of this packet has some language. It's the positive youth development. The third bullet under Department of Health and Human Services has a brief description of the Children's Trust.
So the idea when we all came together, this was actually something that both the executive branch and the MCPS wanted to do together, which was to have a space where to replicate something that works very well in other states. It exists in Florida, it exists in California. The idea being that there is actually something that sits outside of both of our structures, but is driving both policy and funding priorities in the county. And in Florida, it primarily is in a 0 to 5 space, as it is in California, and they have funding streams of their own, whether in Florida it's property tax, in California it's based on tobacco tax money, which is the settlement money, which is greatly reduced now, and so they're struggling somewhat. But the idea being that you're really driving very specific priorities in a jurisdiction. We've had a lot of conversation here about wanting to do more in that 0 to 18 space. We're not actually limiting ourselves 0 to 5 because we think there's a lot going on in the middle school and high school arena. And we've been doing positive youth for some time, but how do we also drive the 0 to 5 agenda, which I know is very dear to a lot of folks? So that was sort of how the conversation emerged. We did a lot of research. We actually hired a consultant to help us. We walked it all the way through together. There was never a moment when MCPS was not sitting at the table with us all along the way.
Okay.
But the idea, part of the idea as to why the money showed up in HHS was because the fund itself was to sit in the community foundation and was to be used to leverage funding from the private sector.
So this
From the
fund is supposed to
foundation.
go to directly to the community foundation?
Right. So it was a pass-through, and we already had existing contracts with the community foundation. So the idea when we had conversations with OMB, the idea was that the money would be put into the HHS budget so that because we already have existing contracts with, it wouldn't be a new set of tasks that another department would have to undertake, which is why the money showed up in HHS.
So can I just ask you, so does that mean that you shouldn't infer from this $100,000 that next year's appropriation to the HHS department is $200,000 and then it's $500,000? I mean, yes, of course, it implies a future funding commitment, but this was to go to the community foundation to engage a planning process?
So initially, the thought was that there would be a significant, what's the word I'm looking for? It's not an endowment because it's not an endowment, but a principal amount that would sit. That would be core and that would be leveraged against. And that amount is not 100,000. That amount would be greater than 100,000 at some point.
Right.
But this is where we wanted to start, and we wanted to start it and build the infrastructure, and Gabe can speak to this, but to build the infrastructure initially, but not to have, not to attempt to do anything in this year, Mr. Leggett felt would be inappropriate, that we've got this construct of something bold and innovative that we need to go forward and do it. We obviously had no control over the MCPS budget. There was hope that they would be partnering with us all along the way. Unfortunately, they were not able to step forward and do that. But from our perspective in the executive branch,